So try to think back to 2013. It wasn't that long ago. We had air travel and electricity and air conditioning. It was part of the modern era. 2013, Tulsi Gabbard, who was in her early 30s, had just been elected from Hawaii. She was a member of Congress, first termer, a Democrat. And not just a Democrat, she was the single most famous freshman that year, and she was feted by her party. The Democratic Party made her vice chair of the DNC as a freshman that year. And she was on the cover of magazines. She was the future of the Democratic Party. It was 2013. Fast forward 11 years to the beginning of 2024. That very same person was a headliner at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee. And not only did she speak there, she was arguably the most popular person who spoke there this year, 11 years later. Here's part of what she said.
Our democracy is under attack. The perpetrators of this attack are those who, in the name of saving our democracy, are destroying it. I don't use these words lightly. Every one of us who loves this country and who cherishes peace and freedom should be very alarmed by those who, driven by their insatiable hunger for power, are actively undermining all that we stand for. And almost every single day, if you're paying attention to the news and the headlines, there is some new assault and some new attack. Now, it's the Democrat elite and the swamp creatures in Washington who are doing all that they possibly can to keep us, the American people, from a very simple thing, having the freedom to choose who we want to be our next president. And it is clear through their actions they have no respect for us, and they have no respect for our fundamental rights as citizens of this democratic republic. They are so terrified that we, the people, may make what they think is the wrong choice, that in the name of protecting democracy and saving us from ourselves, they're actually destroying our democracy and taking away our freedom.
Wow, you can see why she was the most popular speaker at CPAC this year. But again, 11 years from vice chair of the DNC to headlining CPAC. Some people have asked, well, wait a second, that's awfully fast. This must be an op. She must be a secret lefty or a CIA agent. Well, of course, we can't know. But if she was, she'd probably be getting something out of it. She'd be really rich. But no, Tulsi Gabbard is probably the least rich, famous person in the United States. She has not cashed in, just the opposite. She's actually really suffered for her change of heart. So what was the process that led her from freshman in Congress 11 years ago to headliner at CPAC this year? It's a very interesting story. And she's written it in a book that has just come out, For Love of Country, Leave the Democratic Party Behind. And she's joining us today to explain what exactly happened in her life. Tulsi Gabbard joins us now.
Thank you very much.
Tulsi Gabbard, thank you so much. And congrats on the book. And I have to say, the first thing that jumped out, Tulsi is one of the most rock-solid, honorable people I've ever met, says Joe Rogan. And I can attest to that. That is true.
Thank you.
I feel the same way.
Thank you.
So how... But I can also see why people are like, what is this?
Yeah.
Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii, probably the most reliably Democratic liberal state. Argument there maybe, but subjective, but pretty close, if not the most. And now this, like, what happened?
It's you know, a lot has happened in that 11-year period. As you were talking, I'm just
true.
Thinking through, like, gosh, has it only been
has
it only been 10, 11 years? But to me, it just shows how insane today's Democratic Party has become.
Yes.
Really, truly. You know, I joined the Democratic Party in 2002. I was 21 years old when I ran for the state house in Hawaii. And as you know, I come from, you know, my parents are very independent-minded people. They raised all of us 5 kids to be critical thinkers and independent-minded. Make your own decision, but do your research and figure out why you are coming to this conclusion or why you are coming to this decision. And so when I had decided to run for office in Hawaii, there wasn't just like, well, of course I'm going to be a part of this party or that party because, you know, somebody told me to, or because it was like a family generational thing. None of that was there. And so I really started to look at, you know, Hawaii's history in politics. Why was Hawaii such a strong Democratic state? As it still is now, it's a little bit less so, but at that time, what I saw was a party that welcomed free thinkers. It was truly a big tent party, even in their own words. It was a party that stood up for civil liberties. It's a party that stood up for freedom of speech and was willing to fight for it.
That is true.
It was a party that in Hawaii's history fought for working people. It fought for average everyday Americans against the corporate industrial complex, which in Hawaii was the big four plantation owners back in the day. And so it was because of those reasons, and looking at leaders like JFK.
So can I just ask you a question?
Yeah.
For people who aren't familiar with the history of the state, which is actually very interesting.
It is.
Completely different from the history of any other of the 49 states.
Yes.
It was almost like a feudal system
Yeah.
in Hawaii. Is that fair?
It was. It was. And going back, and this is where there was a big shift. And people in the political world ask all the time is like, why did Hawaii become such a strong Democrat state? It was because there were four major landowners that came in and essentially took the land from the local people through the Queen in jail, and decided, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start growing sugarcane. We're going to start growing pineapples. And they essentially installed themselves as the government of what was then the territory of Hawaii. And local people really didn't have a whole lot of say in it. But through that process, there were immigrants coming from Japan and from the Philippines, from Portugal, from places all over the world, seeking opportunity, getting work visas and work contracts to go and work in the fields. And these massive plantation owners essentially treated them like crap. Subhuman living conditions, abysmal pay, and essentially what we would call complete abuse in this day and age. But they got away with it because the people had no voice. When one group started to rise up and say, hey, we got to stick together and demand better living conditions and better pay. Let's say it was the Filipinos who did it. And they said, okay, well, fine. We're just going to have the Japanese workers come in and take over your fields and leave you with nothing. And so pitting one group against the other. So in Hawaii, it was the ILWU union primarily that came in and actually started to organize workers. And there was a couple of Democrat political leaders who had failed at the polls previously because they didn't have the votes. They came in and said, hey, look, we're going to fight for you. And they did. And that was when Hawaii shifted from Republican to Democrat control, because the Democrat Party at that time was the party of the people. Didn't matter where you were from, didn't matter your background, how much money you made or didn't made, your education or anything else. They were the party of the people, battling against the elite. And so the reason why this story is important is because you look at that legacy in my home state of Hawaii, and then you look at what's happening in our politics today, where unfortunately the Democrat Party and those in charge of it are now the party of the elite, who are way out of touch with the experience of everyday working people across this country. And it is unfortunate. It is unfortunate that that party has gotten so far away from its roots of being a party that celebrated freedom, its roots of being a party that fought for civil liberties, to one now where, with the Biden-Harris administration and the Democrat elite across Washington, are intentionally politicizing and weaponizing the tools of our own government and their friends in big tech and social media and their friends in the mainstream media to take away our freedoms, to take away our right to free speech, to violate our privacy and our civil liberties. They have become the party of war. In every respect, unfortunately, the Democrat Party has become a party that is undermining the very fabric of our country, of our freedom, of our Constitution, and the rule of law, which is why ultimately I left the Democratic Party. And it's why I am sounding the alarm bells as we head into this very critical election year about really what's at stake.
The reason that I know you're sincere is because you left the Democratic Party at exactly the moment that it solidified its position as the party of the rich.
Yeah.
And there's so many rewards that you can receive if you sign up. So I know a million people who've moved in the other direction. You know, Joe Scarborough or Stuart Stevens or Steve Schmidt or all the guys from the Lincoln Project, Bill Kristol.
Right.
And they've all been rewarded for it. A lot, because there's a lot of money to pass around if you do that.
Mm-hmm.
But you left at exactly the moment when you could have gotten kind of rich by staying and reading the talking points.
Yeah, when I first got elected in 2012, it was a race that I was not supposed to win. If you listen to anybody who knew anything about politics, and I won that election. Zero support from any local or national Democratic Party individuals or the party as a whole.
Huh.
It was, imagine this, the people's voices were heard through their votes, and they were sick and tired of the pay to play corrupt politics, and wanted a new direction and a fresh direction of leadership. And so it was a hard fought election, but I had no idea what was in store when I actually went to Washington.
So what did you notice? I mean, Hawaii,
well, first of all,
the obvious is very far away. It's just so far.
It is
physically from DC.
It is. And you would think in the age of technology that distance wouldn't matter so much, but it kind of does.
Yeah, it does
in some
a
ways.
lot.
But shortly after my primary election, I got a call from Nancy Pelosi saying, "Hey, do you want to speak during prime time at the Democratic convention coming up?" And I was like, yes.
How old were you?
I was 31.
What a trip. That must have
And I said I would like to speak about veterans. I was serving in the Hawaii National Guard at the time. I'm still serving the U.S. Army Reserve now. But to me, hey, here's an opportunity to speak to millions of people across the country about the people who are nearest and dearest to my heart, my brothers and sisters. And so the whole thing was quite surreal, because I didn't seek it out. I didn't know how that machine worked. But I found myself getting these phone calls from people within the Democratic Party, like, "Hey, go and speak at this like premier event that like most people don't get invitations to." And a couple of weeks after I was in office, I got a call saying, "Hey, what would you say if you were asked to serve as vice chair of the DNC?" And I was just literally, my response was like, "What does a vice chair of the DNC do? I don't know nothing about this. What do you really want from me? What are you asking of me?" Ultimately said yes, because this is an opportunity to be in a position to make some positive change. But these kinds of things kept on happening over the, it's kind of my first couple of years in office. But, and you'll appreciate this, one of the major turning points that started to slow down the fanfare and like the headlines of, like, I remember there was one at the Democratic convention. I don't know if it was CNN or MSNBC. Someone was like, "Oh, I wonder who's going to play Tulsi Gabbard in a movie," and like all this stuff. I'm like, this is so weird. But that summer of 2013, my first year in Congress, as you know, one of the main reasons that I ran for Congress was because of the experiences that I'd had on both of my Middle East deployments, where I experienced the cost of war firsthand, serving in a medical unit. And I wanted to be in a position where I could help influence and impact those foreign policy decisions that were directly impacting my brothers and sisters in uniform. I didn't realize that my opportunity to be able to do that would happen so quickly. But it was August of 2013 that President Obama announced that he was going to seek authorization to use military force from Congress to go and drop some bombs on Syria in what would be kind of the first volley of a regime change war there. And I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee at the time. August, most members of Congress are at home during recess, and I was home in my district. And I remember, like it was yesterday, pumping gas at the gas station, and this woman came up to me, and I'd never met her before. Local lady came, she grabbed my arm and looked at me with this intensity in her eyes, telling me that her son had just come home from Iraq, and she had been terrified that he wouldn't come home. He was finally home with her, and now they wanted to send him back to another war in another country, and begged me, "Please, Tulsi, don't let them take my son from me."
Jeez.
And as the next couple of days went on, I would bump into more people like that in the supermarket or just around town who were absolutely terrified. I went back to Washington. We held all the committee hearings, open hearings, classified briefings, and I went in with an open mind, saying, give me all of the information. I want to make sure that I do my due diligence before I take a position or make a decision on this. And ultimately, Secretary Kerry came in and briefed us. The answers to very direct questions that I had, such as, what is our objective? What is your objective in wanting to go and start another war in another country? How do you think they will respond? What will you do next? What is that second, third, fourth order of effects and consequences that will always happen? And the question, when I said, what is your objective? I believe it was Secretary Kerry or someone from the State Department who said, well, we don't want to deliver a decapitation. We don't want it to be a pinprick. We want this to be a punch in the gut and send a message. And my question was, okay, so a punch in the gut, like, what will you do when they respond? And they said, well, we don't think there'll be a response. That's your plan? You don't think there will be a response?
Gary said
if
that?
somebody came up and punched you in the gut, would you just not respond? If they don't respond, they've got some pretty, weaponized, powerful friends. You don't think they'll respond? And what if they don't respond to us, but they respond by attacking some of our friends who may be in the region? All of these different kinds of questions. There's well, we just don't think they'll do that. Well, what happens next? Well, we think this will send a strong message. And it's the same kind of political BS talk that means nothing and is so disconnected from the reality of the people on the ground who have to live with those consequences. And it really surprised me, and maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but it surprised me that after so many years of looking back at the massive mistakes of Iraq, that they could be so glib and just saying, oh, we'll just go drop some bombs and send a message and that'll be it.
They learned nothing.
They learned nothing. And so I penned an op-ed and published it. And I was certainly the first Democrat, maybe the first member of Congress to come out in opposition to President Obama's request. And within hours of publishing that op-ed, I got a call from the White House. And essentially what they said was, how dare you? How dare you go against your president? How dare you go against the president who came from your home state? Not a moment of the conversation. There wasn't much of a conversation, first of all, but they were not interested at all in the reason for my opposition, which I stated pretty clearly in the op-ed, how well thought out this decision was. It was not made haphazardly. They weren't interested in my experience that I brought that helped inform my decision of having deployed twice to the Middle East before. And it told me a lot about them, that they were more concerned with, and they cared more about being a good member of the team and go Team Obama and go Team Democrats than they were concerned about the actual consequences of the very serious request that he was saying he would come to Congress with. It sent a strong message to them as well that I wasn't the person that they thought I was going to be, in someone who could be puppeteered, who could be bullied into just going along with the boss or whatever they had in mind. That was kind of the beginning of their realization that, okay, this one thinks for herself and she's not afraid to take a stand.
So, I mean, at that point, they have two options. They can either try and crush you. You're a freshman, so it's a little early for that. And they've also ginned up the publicity machine on your behalf. You probably weren't even aware of this, but most congressmen come to Washington. No one knows they're there.
Yeah.
Everyone knew you were there.
Yeah.
So they can try and crush you, or they can try and suborn you, bribe you, give you stuff to win you over.
Yeah.
What did they try?
Um, it is kind of the public things. Like I remember, and I think you'll get a kick out of this, being invited to the White House Correspondents' Dinner my first year in Congress.
Yeah.
I had guys who've been in Congress that coming up to me saying, "Gosh, Tulsi, how come you got invited? I've been here for 4 terms, 8 years, and I still haven't gotten invited to that." And I was like, "Do you want to go?" I really don't like going to these kind of things. I hate these big kind of parties and social things. Like, you can have my seat, but it was that kind of thing where, oh, go to this embassy for this fancy party, like all this stuff that unfortunately too many members of Congress find very, very appealing and get some kind of, I don't know, I don't want to use the word fulfillment because it's not fulfilling, but I guess it's what they want. And I didn't want any of that. So the things that they were putting before me were not attractive to me at all. And it all kind of definitely came crashing down in 2016 when I took a step that to go after Hillary Clinton when she was running for president in the Democratic primary. I was vice chair of the DNC, and I saw that the mainstream media, they were all saying she was the most qualified person ever to run for president and listing out all of the titles that she has held, but not a single one of them was questioning or holding her to account for her record on foreign policy or challenging her on what kind of commander-in-chief
or the job that she had done in any of those jobs. Like,
right.
That was irrelevant.
And then, right, the actual record of what happened. Tell us what happened in Libya, actually, for you, for her pushing for the regime change in Libya and what happened as a consequence. There are so many different examples.
For sure. So you said that out loud. What happened then?
I resigned as vice chair of the DNC.
Why?
Because the rules said that as officers of the DNC, you can't take sides in a partisan primary. The DNC itself under Debbie Wasserman Schultz clearly was in every way tilting the scales for Hillary Clinton. But I resigned as vice chair of the DNC and endorsed Bernie Sanders around this single issue of foreign policy.
Yes. Specifically
because while I disagreed with Bernie on a bunch of things, he was certainly more of a non-interventionist than the warmonger that Hillary Clinton is. And I knew that would provide me with a platform to have a voice and actually speak the truth to the American people about her record and how dangerous she would be if she were ever our president, and how personal this was for me, because the cost is real.
So what happened when you did that?
I announced it on Meet the Press on a Sunday morning. Didn't tell anybody I was doing it. No one, before I went and made that announcement on that show. Monday morning, came back to work, and a lot of my Democrat colleagues were basically reading, drafting their political eulogies for me. Just like, you're done, Tulsi. Hillary will be president. You will not get a single dime for your district. Anything that your community needs.
For your district?
For my district.
Not for your campaign?
Not for me. For my district. They've never given me anything for any of my campaigns, and I'm totally fine with that. But that my district and my constituency in Hawaii would be punished for doing what I did. I also learned that there is an actual list of people who are, blacklisted, I suppose. And I was told that it would take years and years and years to ever work my way off that list. I was chuckling at all of it.
So they said this out loud? They thought this,
yeah.
Or they said it out loud?
Oh, yeah. No. These were many conversations, walking to and from votes with different people who were pulling me aside and offering their condolences, their political condolences to me, because that I had made a decision that they said would be equal to the death of my political future.
That's crazy.
Yeah. MSNBC, I remember doing an interview. I think it was one of the first debates that Bernie and Hillary had. in Florida, I think it was. And an MSNBC anchor said, like, aren't you afraid of the Clintons and what they'll do? And I said, no, I'm not afraid. But I thought it was quite curious that he felt compelled to ask that question with concern in his voice.
Yeah, well, people who've been around them knew.
Yeah.
So you still, though, were in the party. When did it become clear, like, I can't represent this party anymore?
It was in the fall of 2022. There were a lot of critical midterm elections happening that year, increasingly over time. And it wasn't one specific thing that caused me to make this decision, but it was increasingly over time. A couple of things. Obviously, the radical change that the Democratic Party leadership went through in really truly become a woke warmongering party of the elite. But also it was a recognition that I had done all I could to try to change the party from within. I tried as vice chair of the DNC. I tried as a candidate running for president in 2020 in the Democratic primary. And the things that I was talking about bringing the party back to its roots, bringing the party back to being the party of the people and the party of freedom, the party of peace and security, it not only fell on deaf ears, I was booed by, the party elite for having the audacity to push for these sorts of things.
This is a very restrained version of what I saw. They didn't just boo you. Yeah. They accused you of being an agent for a foreign power and a disloyal American and an evil person.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw that.
It's true. It's such a crazy accusation to make. Obviously completely baseless. The media never asked Hillary Clinton for evidence of this traitorous, treasonous act that she's accusing me of as a sitting member of Congress and as a soldier wearing our country's uniform.
An officer, right?
Yes. And here's the problem is that it works. And that's why they continue, even now, how many years later, they continue to fall back on the Russia playbook. It's a Russian asset. They've used this against you. They've used this against Donald Trump, and they continue to come back to this.
Yeah, but I'm not an officer in the United States Army, and you are. So it's a little weird to say, I mean, Hillary Clinton, I will never forget it, accused you of being a disloyal person. That's a crime under the military code, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And one that would not only be grounds for them to remove my security clearance, but it would be grounds for discharge, and it would be grounds for, enforcement under the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Well, yeah. If you're actually working for a foreign power as a military officer, you can be executed for it. Yeah. So, it's not a small thing to say. So rather than just saying, Tulsi Gabbard's an idiot or I disagree with her or whatever, they went right to that, the heaviest thing you could ever say about somebody, about an American. That was all foreign policy related, right?
Yes.
That's the way it felt to me.
It was foreign policy related, and it was related to the fact that I had the audacity to go against them, to challenge the elite of the Democratic Party, which is Hillary Clinton and it's Barack Obama and it's the people who surround them in the military industrial complex, in the media industrial complex, those who are pushing. And it's not limited to the Democratic Party, of course. Oh. Mitt Romney also called me a treasonous person who is a Russian asset or something along those lines. So they are all part of this permanent Washington elite who cannot allow for those who challenge them to go unscathed, because their whole existence is based around that. It's based around power and where they get their power from.
And the main source of power, obviously, is the exercise of military force.
Yes. It's the most powerful thing. We are the most powerful military in the world. And that's what's so offensive about them, and what they're advocating for is they treat our military it's like, and actually, I don't want to say they forget, because they're not stupid. They really don't care about the men and women who make up our military and who live and die by the consequences of their actions, whether they're holding office or not. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama are not in office right now, but they still continue to wield immense power in influencing the decisions that are being made.
So can I just, it's sort of sidebar, but I think relevant, interesting. Are you answering the question that everyone watching has, which is who is running the government at this point? It's obviously not Joe Biden.
Yeah.
You think Hillary Clinton?
It's not a leap of imagination to know that that's true when you look at the people who are in Joe Biden's administration. They are the people who were the right hands for the Obama administration, for President Obama, and for Hillary Clinton. When Hillary Clinton said herself the other day, she said, "Oh yeah, I talk to the White House every day." So it is no shock or surprise who the influences are behind the policies that are coming out of this White House that many people say is the most radical and woke White House that our country has ever seen.
Oh, well, there's no question about it. So, but as this was happening to you, I mean, I'm sure you don't want to go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Good for you. Tiresome. But on the other hand, it is a lot easier and much more pleasant to be loved than it is to be hated. I think it's just true. And so as you became like really hated by the leadership of the Democratic Party, and they weren't hiding it at all.
No.
Did you ever think like maybe it's just easier to kind of pretend bombing Syria is a good idea? Did you ever question your decision to say no?
No. I knew that would be true. I knew that there was certainly an easier path to take.
Yeah, you think?
It was kind of laid out for me when I first got there. But I never second guessed my decisions about these different positions that I took. I never regretted them. Never, not to this day. And I never will, because I didn't go to Washington to be loved by the people who live and exist and thrive in that bubble.
Well, sure, I get it. And their love is not worth having. I
No.
totally agree. But their money's good.
Yeah.
And I think you're the only famous person I've ever met who flies coach.
Yeah.
And you're certainly the only very, very well-known member of Congress and former presidential candidate I've ever met in my entire life who didn't cash in personally. And I know that is factually true.
Yeah.
So, like, do you ever think, like, maybe, I don't know, it's easier to fly first class. Maybe I should have just...
It's not worth it.
Okay. Good.
It's not worth it.
Do you think it's weird that we never talk about the money involved? Like, I just know that from living there.
Yeah.
And from knowing a lot of well-known people who've, become famous in politics.
Yeah.
And there's not one of them, literally not one on either side who's not in the top 1% for income, but you're not.
No.
Why doesn't anyone ever say that?
Yeah, because it is the assumed norm. It's not the exception. What they're doing is the norm. So why would they talk about it? There's nothing to talk about because they assume that every member of Congress, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, the day you walk out, you get your payday.
What did you get when you walked out?
Nothing. Nothing. I had to come up with a plan of, like, all right, we got to figure out how we're going to pay the bills.
How much money had you amassed during your time in Congress?
Every financial advisor would probably be very disappointed because my husband and I were, I had like, okay, we got a couple of months. We got a couple of months that we can make it through. We got to come up with a plan. Otherwise,
before you'd have to sell your weekend house, or
sure, the imaginary weekend house. Yeah, no. Were
you able to buy a big house when you were in Congress?
Of course, no. We bought a house. I don't think you ever came to our house there, but here's I'll give you a little hint where and we shared it with my sister and her husband. But we did buy a house in a neighborhood that was affordable in DC, and we found out the first week that we were there that we tried to order takeout from somewhere.
Oh, in DC. Oh, you lived in the hood. I knew
DC. that. and as soon as they were like, okay, put the order in and everything else, and as soon as I gave them the address, they're like, oh no, we don't deliver to that neighborhood. We won't cross that bridge. We won't cross the Anacostia Bridge to get to your house.
You lived on what we call the other side of the river.
Literally. Anyway, it's, there was a question that a reporter asked me a couple of years, I forget, 2 or 3 years after I'd been in Congress. They're like, okay, you've been here a while now. Do you feel like you fit in? And it was a surprising question to me. And I said, no, I don't ever want to fit in here. This is not my home. I'm grateful to get out of here as quickly as possible, as soon as votes are done, as often as possible, get back to my community in Hawaii, or get out and visit other communities in the country, and remain very closely connected to the people who I'm there to serve. And as you know, we've talked about this before. There are far too many politicians from both parties who spend their time at social hours and happy hours with lobbyists than they do actually spend time at home.
Does anyone ever? Oh, well, that's certainly true. And they have sad, sad personal lives. Almost, not all, but most, as you know. I'm always amazed by the financial disclosures. And again, since this is the last question, but since no one else talks about it, I will. And you see these members of Congress who are, in some cases they're clever, maybe even smart. In some cases they're just pretty ordinary, actually. And they're so rich relative to the mean.
Oh, yeah.
Does anyone, and I have no idea how they made all that money. I have no clue at all how Nancy Pelosi is just so rich, or how her stock picks are like way better than Warren Buffett's. Like, how does that happen?
Yeah.
But, does anyone ever talk about that internally, like
No.
on the Hill?
No, because most of them benefit from it. I love these like accounts on X and on Instagram that pop up now that are actually tracking.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they do it. I really don't know how they figure it out, but they are tracking what she's buying and what other members of Congress are buying.
Nancy Pelosi's
and
stock
when.
tracker?
Oh, yeah. That's definitely one of them.
It's
But they're like, hey,
incredible.
everybody pay it. It is. It's incredible to see. And when you watch that, and I'm so glad for the transparency that they're providing to
Yes.
people in real time almost, but it's no wonder why she and others, Democrats and Republicans, who could very easily pass the legislation that says no member of Congress or the Senate or their spouse or their senior staff should be allowed to trade in stocks, period, full stop. It's such an obvious way to stop even the perception, if you want to claim like innocence or whatever. There should be no perception that our elected leaders are profiting off of the knowledge that they have as policymakers that directly impact industry and businesses. That's a no-brainer to me. I introduced legislation when I was in Congress to do that. Many people have since then. There's been a lot of talk and conversation. Why hasn't it gone anywhere? That's why, because they profit off it. So they don't, of course they don't want to talk about
But that's
it.
just an easy one.
It is. And frankly, like, why do they need to be forced? When I'm not some kind of stock trader, but when I was like 23 and 24, I had like $5,000 in my savings account. I was like, okay, cool. Let me learn a little bit about stocks. I put some money in some stocks, and I don't remember how they did, but I knew immediately, like going into Congress, perception is reality.
Yes.
And so it doesn't matter like, well, I've had this stock for 15 years or whatever. It doesn't even matter what it is. I got rid of, I did not participate in anything related to stocks or stock trading or buying or selling or anything for the entire time that I was in Congress. And it's not some like, oh, look at me, I'm so great. It's just common sense that we have people in great positions of power. Why should they be forced to do something with the passage of a law? Why don't they just do the right thing and say, you know what? We get that even an innocent thing could be perceived as insider trading. We're just not going to go there.
Because it's too lucrative to give up.
And they know they can get away with it.
So it's interesting. So you have explained, and thank you, the history of Hawaii, which I think is directly relevant to the choices that you've made. And as far as I know, everything is true. And so the party has changed a lot in just the brief time that you were a member of it. A lot, dramatically, unrecognizable. But also in the process of going through all these experiences and being attacked by people who thought who said they were your allies. You've got to change.
Yeah.
I mean, I've changed dramatically in 20 years just through, we all do,
Yeah.
if we're honest. So how have you changed? Like, what perceptions of yours are different from what they were 5 years ago?
It is that the last 5 years that it became more and more clear to me how many people, especially in the Democratic Party, in Washington specifically, how little they think of the Constitution. And, I think the last 5 years especially are pretty pivotal because you look at what happened with COVID, for example, as a starting point of how people, both at the federal level, at the state level, county level, in a lot of places, when given just a little bit of power, man, they took advantage of that and continued to abuse that power in a way that just didn't make sense. It didn't make sense. When they're like, oh, okay, well, for public safety, everybody's got to stay indoors and you can't go to church and you can't even worship, out like in Hawaii on the beach. You can't have like an outdoor service. But if you're going to go and do a Black Lives Matter march, that actually rises above any public health and safety concerns that we talked about. And so that's okay. The politically motivated decisions that were being made in the midst of what they were calling this, the greatest health epidemic of our time, I think exposed pretty deeply to a lot of people that it was really all just about power and how little they were concerned about things like freedom and civil liberties and the ability
Yes.
for us to make our own choices for ourselves. And then it just continued to escalate more and more with the Biden-Harris administration, in how they were undermining the rule of law, continuing to this day, and how willing they were to both directly and indirectly censor, blacklist, and smear everyday Americans across the country if you happen to challenge them, whether it be on COVID or it be on things like it. And this was, I think this was the thing that caused Mitt Romney to call me a treasonous liar, was saying, hey, there are U.S. funded, DOD funded biolabs in Ukraine that should be secured because there's a war going on over there. And the last thing we or the world needs is anything going on in those biolabs being unleashed in a way that could pose a threat to people. That was seen as
But I should just say, you weren't guessing.
no.
You got that, or it was confirmed in any case, in a public exchange in the Senate between Marco Rubio of Florida, the sitting
Yes.
Republican senator, and Victoria Nuland, the Undersecretary of State, who volunteered it on camera.
Yes.
So,
And it was on the DOD website talking about their long history
right,
of funding these biolabs, not only in Ukraine, but in many other countries.
of course, because
around the
it's
world.
outside U.S. law, right? So they can, and it's bioweapons research, obviously. But you were just I don't even think you said that. You just said basically what the Undersecretary of State said
Right.
in the Senate,
Right.
and then you have a creature like Mitt Romney calling you a traitor to your country.
did.
So what do you think of him? Like, what is that? Why would he be so committed to a lie that he'd be willing to try to destroy your character?
He is part of that neocon, neolib establishment in Washington that poses a direct threat to our republic, to our democracy, and to our freedom. And that really is at the heart of why I chose to leave the Democratic Party. Seeing people, and yep, got it, he's a Republican, but he took the same position as Hillary Clinton and many other Democrats who don't care about our country. That's what it comes down to.
I agree.
They don't care about our country. I challenged Mitt Romney. I sent him a legal letter challenging him on his accusation for the very reason that we talked about. As a uniformed officer serving in the United States Army, his accusation as a U.S. senator is a crime punishable by death. So if you're going to make that accusation, as he did on what was then known as Twitter, you better freaking back it up.
Is it a little, if you take 3 steps back, it's like obviously Mitt Romney is emotionally a child. He's very much a sub-genius. He's like not a genius. Let's just put it that way. And he's made hundreds of millions of dollars in our economy. Like, what does that tell you about our economy? Like, how could a guy like that get so unbelievably rich? Like, there's something systemically wrong, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole, I think there's a huge, and I think this will be the topic of the next book that I'll write, is as we talk about the military industrial complex,
Yes.
there is a corporate industrial complex
For sure.
that exists as well. I'm all about capitalism, but when you look at the monopolies of
that's not capitalism.
That's not capitalism at all. You look at how many small businesses are suffering in this country because of overregulation by government, and because they can't afford to pay millions, tens of millions of dollars to have lobbyists going and scratching the back of politicians so that they can create the loopholes that allow their business to thrive at the cost of the mass majority of the small businesses in our country.
Exactly
and the
right.
elimination of competitiveness, true competition, which is what capitalism is all about, true competition in our country. And that's how, when you look at people like Mitt Romney and you see how they have done so well, that's the reason why.
He's just so disgraceful. It's hard to believe he's real, but he is. So how did he respond when you
He
said
didn't. His silence was.
he didn't respond at all?
Did not respond at all. Not to my lawyer, and not on Twitter, and not in any way, shape, or form. Which it didn't surprise me.
It's so dishonorable.
It is. I am so grateful, and really truly feel like it is a privilege to be able to serve our country in uniform. April makes 21 years for me. I'm grateful to serve as a battalion commander currently, where I have the opportunity to work with incredible Americans who come from all over the country and who deeply love our country. It's not a small sacrifice to make, both for those who are serving as active duty service members as well as those who serve in the reserve component. There's a reason why we do it, and it stems from a deep love for our country. And to have a guy like that make such an accusation, it hits close to home, not only for me, but the real issue with that, and why I challenged him on it, is because when people like Mitt Romney make that kind of accusation, when people like Hillary Clinton call me a traitor and a Russian asset or a puppet of Putin, this is not about me. It's about the message that they're sending to every serviceman and woman in this country, and every American, that if you dare to challenge us, we will come at you.
It's always
with all
the
we
least
have.
American people who make the claim that you're not American enough.
Yeah.
But do you ever think, so again, this is demonstrable if anyone who's made it to this point in the conversation can decide, do I agree or disagree with Tulsi Gabbard? That's fine. But I don't think any fair person could say you're in this for the money or the accolades, just the opposite. You're continuing to get deployed and you're not making any money doing that. You're doing it anyway. It's quite a time commitment. Do you ever think like maybe politics is not the business for me because I believe what I believe and I'm kind of never going to sell it out? Maybe you're not transactional enough for this. No, I'm serious.
I have never thought of quote unquote politics as a career.
Yes.
At all, ever. And so the different times in my life where I have held public office, it's never been, well, this is what I'm going to do for the next few decades and then I'll retire. And it's why I have left at different times. I did not run for re-election when I was serving in the state house because I decided to volunteer and deploy to Iraq with my brothers and sisters in the Hawaii National Guard at the time. I did not run for Congress again in re-election in 2020 because I felt like I could, the climate of the House of Representatives had gotten to that point where I felt like I had maximized the impact that I could make there, and I could be of more influence at that time on the outside, kind of holding their feet to the fire and being able to share exactly what I am now with the American people, the truth about what's going on in Washington and the truth about these politicians who claim to care for you, but show through their actions that they don't, more and more brazenly. And this is really, you'd ask the question about what happened over the last 5 years, and
how has it changed
the change really, where there has been a change, it has come from a much deeper appreciation, frankly, of our Constitution and the role that our leaders must have in truly upholding the Constitution. It's obviously something I've sworn oath to twice in my life, and I care very deeply for. To see how those in power were so brazenly, and continue to so brazenly, abuse their power and weaponize, our law enforcement, the national security state, all of these different tools that are at their disposal, increasingly pushing us towards a place where our country is being led by a tyrannical government.
Yes. The problem
is a very real. It's a very real danger.
Oh, I agree.
That I frankly couldn't, 10 years ago, maybe even, less than that. I don't think I would have said that.
Oh, I don't think most people would have said it at all, because it seemed like just the normal disagreements between people with the same goal, which is to help the country. That's not the case. Obviously, the problem with the Constitution, though, is that the whole document basically is just like limits on the power and authority of politicians. That's the whole purpose of it. Here's what you can't do to the population. But it's in the hands of politicians to uphold.
Yeah.
So maybe that's like the core problem with our government, our system of government, is they have to restrain their own power. Yeah. Like, what if they're like, well, we don't care about the Constitution. Like, old white guys wrote it and they were racist, and like it's now invalid.
And that's exactly where the leaders of today's Democratic Party are. That is their mindset.
But what do you do about that?
That's where going and actually looking again at our founding documents, looking at the Declaration of Independence, looking at the Federalist Papers.
Yes.
Where we are reminded over and over and over again about how our nation's founders continued to say it's we the people, that our government does not exist without the consent of the governed. And this is the message I'm carrying everywhere across the country, is that if you are not happy with the direction that our country is headed, and I think that most people are not happy with it, this changes only when we take action. Only when we take action. There's no knight in shining armor that's coming to save the country. Our founders specifically built our country on the foundation of we the people taking ownership and responsibility for the kind of leadership that we want and the kind of future that we want. And right now, I am sounding the alarm and encouraging everyone to sound the alarm. The name of my book is For Love of Country, Leave the Democrat Party Behind, specifically and very directly pointing to those who pose the greatest threat to our democracy, to our freedom, to our security, and our ability to live in peace right now. And my concern, my grave concern, is that in this next election, if President Biden or Harris or whoever they may put up, if it's not President Biden, if they are allowed to remain in power, then we will get to a place where the country that I love, that you love, that so many of us love and appreciate will become unrecognizable, and to a place where the freedoms that we are already starting to lose, that we won't be able to get them back.
I know a lot of people have been to jail in the last 3.5 years, like a lot. And I've interviewed a lot. Just interviewed one today. And they've gone to jail for their political views and for their willingness to challenge the people in power. If Biden or if Clinton and Obama get reelected, using Biden as a cutout, and Kamala Harris, are you worried that, we're talking about like actual American citizens going to jail. We're going to see a lot more of that, it feels like to me.
We are already seeing more of that. And I have no doubt that that will only escalate dramatically, because every time They could win the election by theoretically one vote, and they will run around the country and say, well, the American people have given us a mandate to continue the great work we are doing for this country. Well, the great work that they see they are doing for this country is actually for themselves. And they are completely undermining the fabric that makes this country what it is.
That's for sure. But are you worried? I mean, you're in this interesting position because, they've disliked Trump for a long time, disliked me for a long time. They thought they could use you. They thought they loved you. And so they hate you with a very intense and very specific kind of hate. And you've given them the finger at every turn.
Yeah.
And you won't stop. So, do you ever think to yourself?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. Why wouldn't they indict you for being a Russian agent or whatever?
There's, as we are seeing now, they are completely willing to use the Department of Justice and law enforcement to serve their own political means. So no, it wouldn't surprise me at all. They are showing that even without evidence, without basis, without anything to back up their claims, they are, and this is what they've been doing this against Trump since he first ran for office in 2016. Launching years-long investigations into him, this whole Russia collusion thing, things that were, proven through those investigations. No, there was nothing here, and there's been no accountability for them whatsoever, which goes back to just emphasizing how critical it is. If you are a person who cares about freedom, who cares about our country, who cares about being able to make your own decisions as parents about what kind of education you want for your child, if you care about having a safe community for your child to live in, if you care about having a secure country with borders, the Democratic Party is not the answer. It is not the answer. They are, in fact, the problem.
So you've been in a lot of different news stories talked about as a potential VP choice for Trump. I have no idea if that's going to happen or not. Probably unknowable. Are you open to that? If you don't do that, what else are you open to? What's your plan?
I would be honored. I'd be honored to serve our country in that way or in other ways, and to be in a position to help President Trump, if he is reelected, to actually address these challenges, to help execute those policies that will bring back a secure border, that will breathe new life into our economy and start to get this radical inflation out of control. Which on that note, I was in a conversation the other day with two different groups of people. One was with a very, very wealthy couple. And they were saying, well, gosh, and they're not fans of President Biden either, but the economy is not actually that bad. The stock market's doing all right. And, it's not really as bad as a lot of people are saying it is. And then the next conversation was with people who are not part of that wealthy class, who were talking about, a loaf of bread is 3 times more expensive today than it was 6 months ago or a year ago. Basic necessities, electricity, food, medicine, all of the things that people need just to live and to try to live in a healthy way are far more expensive, but they're not making a whole lot more. The dollar is going, not going nearly as far as it needs to in order to be able to afford this inflation. And so I just mentioned that because this disconnect still continues between the elite in Washington and the reality that they live in versus the reality that the rest of us live in this country. And President Trump recognizes that. I'd love to be in a position to help secure our country and to get us off this path towards World War III and nuclear war that the Democrat elite and President Biden's policies have us on right now.
So my last question, a lot has been written about you, and a lot has been written about your spiritual life. I don't know if any of it's accurate or not. Most politicians don't have a spiritual life, so I think it spooks our media that you clearly do. You can feel it. But I want to ask you a specific question. So there was a fairly famous exchange on MSNBC a week or two ago with a reporter from Politico who was attacking Christians. And that reporter said, the crazy thing about Christians is they think their rights come from God. When, of course, the implication is they really are granted by Joe Biden. Like what? Where do you think our rights come from?
Our rights come from God. I saw that clip, and I laughed when I saw it, and then I was concerned because I saw the people sitting around the table in one of those panels, and they all had serious looks on their faces as they were nodding along with this woman saying this, as though, like, first of all, whatever her spiritual beliefs are or the lack thereof, that's her business.
Yeah.
But have you read the Declaration of Independence? Ever? Certainly not recently, because again, whatever your own personal thoughts may be, the Declaration of Independence is not, they don't mince words.
Yes.
That our God-given rights are inalienable, and they do come from our Creator. And again, recognizing that as the basis for our founding documents is a very powerful message to every person in politics or in power, that you don't get to try to take away those rights. God gives us those rights. Only God can take them away. And this God complex that so many of our politicians have is at the heart of the problem, is they're so eager to put themselves in a position of power where they believe that they have the power to say what is true and what is not true. That something as undeniable as the fact that I am a woman and you're a man is something that they have now declared to be a fungible label, I suppose, that you can just say, I believe I'm a man, so I'm a man, and let it be so. It would be laughable if the consequences weren't so dangerous. To have people in power who don't recognize that our rights and freedoms come from God, and you follow that track, and where does it lead is they really do believe that they are God or should be God, and that they are self-appointing themselves to be in that position of authority and have a lot of tools at their disposal to try to enforce that. And that is what is at the heart of the danger that we face as a country right now. This is something that transcends party affiliation. It transcends how you may like or dislike certain candidates. This is the fact, and it's the reality that we have to confront ourselves with if we care about peace, if we care about freedom, if we care about security, if we care about our country and our future. The choice is very clear in this election and what we must do in leaving the Democrat Party behind.
Tulsi Gabbard, I don't know what's next for you. I don't know what's next for any of us, actually, but I hope you will keep talking.
I will. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Single person in the entire overstaffed Biden administration whose job it is to announce good news. Not one. There's the now familiar Office of Attacking the Middle Class. They're usually quite busy. There's the Department of New and Counterproductive Wars. Those people never sleep. And of course, there's the all-powerful Directorate of Hysteria, which makes sure that every living American is terrified of something or other from breakfast till bed. But there is no good news office. That's something the Biden people never considered. So yesterday, the administration seemed a little awkward, maybe even sheepish, when it announced the best news of all, which is that the COVID era has finally passed. For 3 years, the U.S. has lived under a permanent government-designated COVID emergency. At this point, looking backward, no one can agree on what the point of it was. Certainly nobody got any healthier, that's for sure. In any case, it's ending, for good or bad. Technically, the emergency will continue on till May. This will allow the Biden administration to shovel a few more cargo planes full of tax dollars to its donors in the so-called healthcare industry. But that's it. Those are the last gasps of the Rona scare. We're done. And that means, above all, that we can finally get to the second and much more satisfying part of the program, where we finally hold the people accountable who did what they just did to us. And first on that list would be Joe Biden. At this point, Biden has the functional IQ of office furniture, but his instinctive viciousness remains intact. So Biden, the second he got into office, wasted no time at all in blaming Americans for a virus that China created, and then in using the pandemic to pit neighbors against one another. It was the cruelest and most divisive thing any president has ever done to his own country. In case you've forgotten what it looked like, here you go.
I'm announcing that the Department of Labor is developing an emergency rule to require all employers with 100 or more employees that together employ over 80 million workers to ensure their workforces are fully vaccinated or show a negative test at least once a week. We're going to protect vaccinated workers from unvaccinated coworkers. We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin. The last thing we need is the Neanderthal thinking that in the meantime everything's fine, take off your mask, forget it. For unvaccinated, we are looking at a winter of severe illness and death for unvaccinated, for themselves, their families, and the hospitals they'll soon overwhelm.
Our patience is wearing thin, Americans. If you want to take an untested experimental mRNA shot from a company that has bought immunity from Congress against future lawsuits, you are a selfish Neanderthal. Worse, you're a killer. You're literally killing your own neighbors. The only good news is you will soon die yourself because you deserve it. That's what Joe Biden said. The president said that to his own people, and it was, of course, a lie. Leaving aside its potentially terrifying side effects, the shot did not work as advertised. Sorry, it just didn't. It did not prevent people from dying, did not even prevent them from transmitting or getting COVID themselves. And that's why vaccinated people still wear masks. Everyone knows this, but Joe Biden has never admitted any of it. Nor has the federal government rehired the thousands of good people, really the best people, the Navy SEALs, the nurses, the EMTs, the firemen, the airline pilots, the people who were fired from their jobs for making what turned out to be a pretty solid medical decision. And by the way, no one's ever explained why it was immoral somehow to treat COVID before patients wound up on respirators. Why? What was so bad about ivermectin and monoclonal antibody therapy? We still don't know. The administration still won't tell us where the virus came from, though obviously they know the answer. But now is the time to find out. We need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to get to the bottom of what we just lived through, and let's hope we get one very soon. But in the meantime, this being Washington, the end of COVID, the end of the emergency, poses a much more immediate political problem for the people in charge. The Democratic Party can't govern the country without emergencies. If the public is ever allowed to calm down long enough to think clearly, uncomfortable questions might emerge. Wait a second! If my kid can't get into a good college or work at a big company because he's white, how is this systemic racism thing real? And if it is real, why can't I just change my race like all those people on TV are always changing their sex just by wishing it so? What's the answer? Can you imagine if people started asking questions like that? That would be bad. It would be a disaster. So clearly the Democratic Party needs a new emergency, at least until we start sending ground troops to Ukraine and the population becomes suitably hysterical again. So because they need an emergency, they found one. And the new emergency turns out to be the old emergency, which is white racism. Now, unfortunately for the Democratic Party, white racism is one commodity, like cedar boards, that's getting harder to find. Very few unarmed black men are killed by white cops these days. Where's George Floyd when you need him? So instead, in a pinch, they've settled for an unarmed black man killed by black cops, which they have informed us, nevertheless, despite all appearances, is still the product of white racism. And Barack Obama enthusiastically agrees. This is Barack Obama's lane. He was elected president twice on this kind of stuff, so he immediately jumped into the middle of the Memphis tragedy to remind us that white middle-class Republicans did this. Blood is on their hands. Selma, Dr. King, Rodney King, Trayvon Martin. They're all the fruit of white supremacy. It's true. And as Obama explained on Twitter, you can learn a lot more about how it's true on his website. Okay. So we decided to go there. We went to the Obama Foundation website today, and there we found an entire section on how we have to continue to defund the police. Yes, people are still saying it. Quote, cities like Los Angeles, Baltimore, and Philadelphia have reduced their budgets for their police departments, the Obama Foundation explained without laughing. These cuts made funding more available for other elements of public safety, like affordable housing. Right, because affordable housing is public safety, unless that affordable housing is in Chicago or Baltimore, in which case you're likely to be killed. But whatever. The point is, take 3 steps back, Barack Obama, the former president, is weighing in directly on America's latest fake hate crime. And you have to wonder why. He's not doing it for himself. Obama is retired at this point. He's living on Martha's Vineyard with all the other rich white people. He's doing it for his wife who's never had a real job and apparently is feeling kind of restless approaching 60. And that's why you may have noticed that 6 years after leaving Washington, Michelle Obama is back in the news. She's got a new book and a media tour and even a federally funded hiking trail named for herself in Atlanta. Why has she emerged in this way? Well, there might be a reason. In fact, if you didn't know any better, if you were visiting this country from a foreign land trying to figure out what's going on in the U.S., you might mistake what Michelle Obama is doing right now for the beginnings of a presidential campaign. So first, you have a manufactured white racism panic. That's a clue. But the clincher is menopause. Unlike every other woman over 50 in all human history, Michelle Obama, we're sad to tell you, has menopause. It's not clear where she caught it. Maybe there was an outbreak in Edgartown. But it's bad. At one point, Michelle Obama gained up to 6 pounds. You don't know how much she suffered. Let's put it this way. Baton Death March survivors, she laughs at you. You can't fathom her pain. Watch her talk about it on TV.
But when you're in menopause, you have this slow creep.
You have this slow creep. And no, she's not talking about Joe Biden here, who is technically one of the slowest creeps in America. She's talking about her own thighs. Now, why is Michelle Obama telling you about her menopausal thighs on a TV show? Possibly because she's a crazed narcissist who thinks her own thighs are interesting to you. And that's, of course, true. But there may be other reasons. Consider that today's Washington Post expressed deep dissatisfaction with Joe Biden's current heir, Kamala Harris. Now, Harris is a woman who cannot even consistently pronounce her own first name. And she might not be, as the Post suggests, up for the job of leading this country. And we're quoting. Some Democrats are worried about Harris's political prospects, the paper says. They're worried she may not have the, quote, political skills to win a national race. Whoa, wait a second, pale colonizer. Kamala Harris doesn't have skills? Isn't that racist? Well, as the Post reports, yes, it is. Quote, some party members fear that Americans are simply not willing to elect a woman of color as president, especially given the racism and sexism they see emerging in recent years. Yeah, because there's more now. So here's the problem for the Democratic Party. The current vice president is totally incompetent and universally loathed by everyone, including her staff and possibly her husband, who literally kissed her with a mask on. We're not judging, but you can see it for yourself. So you don't want her, but you can't just ditch her for a white dude. Sorry, that's not equity. So where do you go from here? Ooh, good question. And it turns out it's a question that Michelle Obama seems to have been thinking about recently. Here she is this fall, considering the matter of whether her elderly old servant, her dear, dear friend, Joe Biden, should grace this country with yet another term as president. Watch.
But it's a tough job, and I think that he's doing the best he can under some tough circumstances.
Do you hope that President Biden will run again in 2024?
You know, I will have to see. It's, you know, the reason I don't speak on that is because I know what it feels like to be on the other side of it. And I think that that's a personal decision. I don't want to be one of the millions of people weighing in on what he should do.
He's doing, pause here, the best he can. As to whether he runs again, Michelle Obama is going to have to, much longer pause here, accompanied by a wearied sigh. She's going to have to, quote, have to see about Joe Biden. Have to see. The question is, will the rest of us have to see a whole lot more of Michelle Obama in the next 2 years? Candace Owens is the host of the Candace Owens podcast. She joins us tonight. Candace, thanks so much for coming on. How much more of Michelle Obama do you think we'll be seeing between now and, say, the January primaries of 2024?
I think you have it exactly right. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of her, and I know that we've all been wondering who are they going to put up as a candidate. It's become very clear the media is dumping Joe Biden, right? Suddenly they're able to critique Hunter Biden's laptop. They're able to look at all of his corruption and things that they just were unwilling to do for the first 4 years of his presidency. So they're basically saying, we no longer have your back. Now we're saying that you do some bad stuff. And, oh, maybe he's not just forgetful sometimes. Maybe he is, in fact, senile, and we're not going to have him forth as a candidate. It begs the question, you know, which ism are they going to run on? This is what they do. You are correct. You have sexism, which I think people grew very tired of after Hillary Clinton. We get it. We all hate women. We're all misogynists, according to the left. And they ran Hillary and she didn't win. When they ran Biden, of course, it was racism. It was everybody is a racist. It was the COVID pandemic. You're right about these emergencies. But what I will say about Michelle Obama is I think she's smarter than to run on just race, because people forget this. But Obama was smarter than to run on just race the first time that he ran. He refused to answer those questions. I think what she's doing, and the reason why she's talking about her menopause, is she's making an Oprah appeal. She's appealing to suburban women because that's the people, that's the group of individuals that Biden lost, right? So she thinks if she makes herself relatable to suburban women, and if she just does, just remembers answers, basic answers like what is your name, things that Joe Biden can't remember, what are your children's name, that she can get by because she knows that she'll have the full support of the media behind her. So I don't doubt that they are priming her to be the candidate, because I don't know who else they have to put forth.
Well, that's it. I mean, the bench is thin. I mean, Gavin Newsom presiding over the worst managed state in American history. I don't think there's really much debate about that at this point. I mean, literally. And then Kamala, Carmela, whatever her name is, she can't decide Harris. Anyone who laughs at the idea of Michelle Obama becoming president should remember that Joe Biden is the president.
That's exactly right, and that's why I would not laugh. I would not laugh at it, because she is a way stronger candidate, of course, than Joe Biden, who didn't even have to go to any rallies. He had a bunch of cars that were honking at him. It's definitely something to consider seriously. And I don't know what the point would be. I guess just to pretend that things are changing. We know it's just a continuation of the Clinton administration to the Obamas to the Bidens. It's all the same. But I guess people believe that it's actually changed if they have a different person, and they'll just be relieved that they're not having to fight for Biden again and pretend that he's a legitimate president, and he obviously can't even hold a decent press conference or speak to the media whatsoever. And of course, Kamala, however you say her name, nobody is taking her seriously. She has that Hillary factor. She's just unlikable. You put her in front of a camera and you walk away and you just kind of go, oh my gosh, what was that? I don't like her and I don't know why. And you can't really explain what it is, but there's no way they're going to run an election with her. And I think it's very real that Michelle Obama is going to be their candidate.
I think you're right. I do. Great to see you. Candace Owens, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you're not supposed to notice because we've given up on nature. It doesn't matter. What matters is our intent, because we're God. But if you are paying attention, you may have noticed that the largest mammals in the world are dying for no obvious reason and washing up on the shores of the mid-Atlantic states. Just happened again. What's going on? We've got an update next. We're living in an age when the precise opposite is true of almost every claim you hear in public, so it probably shouldn't shock you that the people who care the least about the natural world are self-proclaimed environmentalists. They're happy to wreck it for profit. They make the oil companies look like deep environmentalists. And if you doubt that, take a look at what's happening off the east coast of the United States. So-called green NGOs, supported, of course, by the people they give money to in the Biden administration, are backing the construction of massive offshore wind turbines that appear to be killing large numbers of whales. In just the last 2 months, at least 10 dead whales have washed ashore in New York and New Jersey. And on Monday, it happened again. A 35-foot male humpback whale died and washed up on Lido Beach in Nassau County in Long Island. Bruce Blakeman is the county executive of Nassau. He joins us tonight. Mr. Blakeman, thank you so much for coming on. So this seems like one of those stories that, since liberals want to save the whales, or did when I was a kid, you'd think would be getting an awful lot of attention, but it seems like nobody wants to talk about it. Why is that?
Well, first of all, I became very concerned when 7 whales washed up on the shores of New Jersey, because obviously we're just miles from New Jersey. Right. And then when I found out yesterday that a whale had washed up on our shores here in Lido Beach in Nassau County, obviously I became concerned, because I know that there is construction taking place out in the ocean. And I think that when you have so many of these large animals that wash up on shore dead, that we now have to take a pause and investigate why is that happening. We've got to find that out, because sea life is an important part of living in Nassau County. We've got whales, we have seals, we have dolphins, and we've got tremendous fishing here. People move here because they want to enjoy the beaches, the wildlife, and the water. So it's a concern, and it bears investigation.
Well, I would say, and it's very odd considering that if you want to move your cows into a new pasture and some rare salamander is found there, the federal government shuts it down. They're very uptight about killing animals. And that's not all bad, by the way. But here, the biggest mammals in the world are dying in an unexplained way, and there's no curiosity. I just think it's the strangest thing I've ever seen.
Well, yeah, listen, there are a lot of people that are disingenuous. They can't find a balance. It's like talking about going all electric. That would be a danger to our America, the way that we live. There'll always be fossil fuels, at least in my lifetime. And certainly alternative energy is important as well. And you have to have alternative energy. But the fact of the matter is there's got to be a balance. And basically, there are people who can never strike that balance unless it's inures to their benefit. And in this case, I'm quite surprised that there aren't more environmentalists and certainly people who are involved in protecting sea life and animals speaking out about this and at least asking for an investigation as to whether or not there's any causal relationship between these whales dying and the construction and the sonar that's being used.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of Americans who care deeply about the natural world, about the environment, but the professional environmental groups are prostitutes and shills, obviously. If you're destroying the environment, you're not saving the environment, I would say. Anyway, Bruce Blakeman, I sure appreciate your being willing to talk about this in public. The Nassau County Executive, thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
So if you're going to have a country this big, you have to have safe and reliable air travel, period. It's not negotiable. We don't have that increasingly. Purely for ideological reasons, the Biden administration has pushed us closer to a major air disaster. In Dallas last year, an American Airlines pilot called Bob Snow says he suffered a heart attack, a cardiac arrest, just 6 minutes after landing a flight with 200 passengers on board. Now, that could have been a historic disaster. But what's fascinating is this pilot was never contacted by the FAA's top flight surgeon, Susan Northrup, to find out what exactly happened, including the obvious question, was this cardiac arrest related to the airline's federally mandated vaccine policies? They don't want to ask any questions about this or any other event like it. Instead, the Biden administration quietly loosened the EKG requirements for pilots, which is not in the interest of public safety. We thought it'd be worth speaking to Captain Bob Snow, who is a commercial airline pilot and brave enough to come on our show. Captain, I sure appreciate your coming on. So you, if I recounted that story correctly, you had a heart attack 6 minutes after you landed a commercial flight with 200 passengers. And I'm so glad that you survived. What happened next, or what didn't happen next, do you believe should have happened?
Well, evening, Tucker, and thank you for having me. Of course, everybody's heard the story of what happened with me about 6 minutes after landing our flight from Denver to DFW. After spending 7 days in the ICU in the DFW metro area, I was released to go back home. And since that date, I arrived home approximately April 16th. I've had no contact whatsoever from anyone, either with the FAA or with the company, to query me or to investigate exactly what happened to me in regards to the cardiac arrest that I experienced while I was in the flight deck.
That seems crazy. I mean, the FAA is very strict with pilots, famously strict. That's why our planes land on time and safely. Why do you think they haven't reached out to you?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think that's one that bears investigation. The FAA, as far as I'm concerned, was in violation of their own guidelines by allowing the administration of EUA-issued vaccines to pilots. Aeromedical guidelines are very strict, we ply our trade based upon our license. Our license is what allows us to operate aircraft, but we can't utilize that license unless we have a valid medical. The FAA has always been very specific on what is allowed to be administered to a pilot. We're not allowed to participate in drug trials, for instance. And an EUA-issued vaccine is certainly not anything that's been approved by the FAA. It's under an EUA. For us to be subject to a mandate without any investigation, without any sort of 12-month studies as to the adverse effects that these vaccines may have, is to me unconscionable. We were basically treated as giant guinea pigs, and unfortunately, of course, we're ultimately responsible. We're the ultimate arbiters of safety in regards to the operation of the aircraft. My primary job as a captain for a major airline is risk mitigation. I'm there essentially to make sure that the operation is run safely, effectively, and primarily on time, if at all possible. But safety is paramount, is what the saying that we've always utilized. And they, basically abrogated their responsibility to look after our safety by forcing us to undergo this vaccination program.
And then their only response is to loosen the requirements for heart ailments in pilots. At this point, knowing that, experiencing what you did personally, are you worried about the safety of commercial air travel?
Well, of course, I do have some concerns. I've been contacted by pilots that have had issues post-vaccine. I'm well aware of one of my former coworkers who unfortunately passed away as a consequence of receiving the vaccine. And this is something that it's going to take a long-term investigation to figure out, what sort of debilitating issues can we be suffering as a result of this foolhardy vaccination program that was that forced upon Americans and the worldwide population. This jab for job idea that folks came up with in management and in the FAA, and also with Biden's vaccine mandate is absolutely unconscionable. I cannot believe that in this day and age, particularly in light of I remember the swine flu vaccination program in the 1970s. They had some serious adverse reactions to that, and that vaccine was pulled almost immediately. But it seems like now everybody has their blinders on, and nobody seems to want to give any consideration to the potential adverse effects of the COVID vaccines. It's become an exceptionally political issue.
I can't even imagine the consequences you're risking for coming on the show, Pilot Bob Snow, and I'm just really grateful that you did, and I hope the Congress follows up right away. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you for having me, and if anybody would like any more information, certainly can take a look at Josh Yoder and U.S. Freedom Flyers or Colonel Tom Rempher at hopingforjustice.org, and thanks again for having me this evening.
Absolutely. Thank you. Country selling out our country to China, and you should be, but that's a very different thing from wanting to go to war with China, a war that we have no assurance we would win, to put it mildly. But in a memo to his troops, 4-star Air Force General Mike Minahan wrote this, quote, "My gut tells me we will fight in 2025. Xi Jinping secured his third term and set his war council in October 2022. Taiwan's presidential elections are in 2024 and will offer Xi a reason. U.S. presidential elections are in 2024 and will offer Xi a distracted America. Xi's team, reason, and opportunity are all aligned for 2025. So what should we take of this? Again, you can be deeply skeptical, in fact, hostile toward China, and still be worried about going to war with China. Jimmy Dore is the host of The Jimmy Dore Show. He joins us tonight to assess. Jimmy, what do you, should we be paying attention to a memo like this? What do you think it means?
What I think it means is that the United States is trying to provoke and saber-rattle with another nuclear power, right? This is what we were supposed to be afraid of was going to happen with Donald Trump, right? We couldn't have, he's a crazy man who's going to have his finger on the nuclear button, and now we have Demented Joe who is saber-rattling with 2 nuclear powers, and they get the corporate media sponsored by the military-industrial complex to get Americans to cheer it on. And why do Americans cheer it on? Because they have no idea what's actually happening with their foreign policy, and what's worse is they have no idea that they have no idea that they don't have any idea what's happening with their foreign policy. We have 400 military bases surrounding China since the Korean War. Do we really think that China is getting ready to invade the United States? Because I tell you, they're not. They make everything we use in the United States. Why? Because the same people who want this war are the same people who took the good jobs that are manufacturing jobs in America, turned them into low-paying, crappy jobs, and then shipped them to China, and then we get angry at them for the system that we set up. They're so corrupt, because that's the thing. Americans have no idea how corrupt their government is. They think our government's just regular corrupt, like, oh, Trump gave his son a job or Biden gave his kid a no-show job in the Ukraine war. That's not. The whole thing is corrupt. The $800 billion military budget is $800 billion of corruption. Why do we have to have 900 military bases around? We're the ones provoking this war, just like we provoked the war in Ukraine. We are now provoking a war with China. And who benefits? I'll tell you right now. Your enemy is not China. Your enemy is not Russia. Your enemy is the military-industrial complex, which has been fleecing this country to the tunes of hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars. How many times are we going to have a defense secretary say, hey, we can't account for $2 trillion in the Pentagon again? Which has happened twice now in my lifetime. So again, people are being, the war machine cannot be stopped. Who's running this country? The war machine. It certainly isn't Joe Biden making these decisions. I would like to know who is making the decisions. And I just want to remind everybody, the United States is the world's terrorist. We just set the Middle East on fire in the last 20 years, and now we're doing a proxy war in Ukraine, which we provoked, NATO provoked, and it was just admitted that we provoked it by the former Prime Minister of Germany. And now we're trying to saber rattle with China, and they're predicting a war. Again, China's not going to invade us. China's not our enemy. We might have an economic war. That's what these are. These are economic wars. These are wars in Ukraine. It's about liquefied natural gas and making sure Germany and Russia never come together, because we fear Russia's natural resources and manpower, and we fear them getting together with Germany with their technology and their capital. And so that's why we blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. That's why we're doing the Ukraine war. This is all about hegemony, imperialism, and economics. And if there's a Marine somewhere, it's there because they're about to steal some natural resources from another country. As everybody's screaming about what a bad guy Putin is for invading Ukraine, the United States is currently occupying a third of Syria. And which third is that? It's the third that has the oil. And how do I know we're there to steal their oil? Because the President of the United States said so.
And we're not even benefiting economically. Of course, that's the rub. Jimmy Dore, appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So you look at our southern border in deep frustration and rage, completely changing the country. 7 million people come across it. It's a joke. Who's allowing this? Well, Alejandro Mayorkas is allowing it. He's the guy in charge of it. He's not been punished for this. Trump was impeached twice over reasons you can't even recall. They were so frivolous. Alejandro Mayorkas is still there, still grinning on television. Well, finally, a Republican member of Congress has a plan to hold this man accountable, plans to announce it on this show straight ahead. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was in Washington today trying to whip up support for a full-blown war against Russia, which he believes America should fight. Johnson met with members of Congress. He conducted media interviews. At one point, he considered coming on this show to make his case, and we were excited to have him. Boris Johnson is a famously erudite and articulate man. If there's one person in politics who might be able to explain how a third world war against Russia might conceivably strengthen the West and not just further empower China, it would probably be Boris Johnson. But apparently he can't do that. Earlier tonight, Johnson passed on our invitation. We were disappointed, but if he ever changes his mind, he is always welcome. So California public schools are among the worst in the world, certainly the English-speaking world, and that's thanks in part to Gavin Newsom, the governor. But that has not prevented his family from making a lot of money from those schools. Fox's Trace Gallagher has that story. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, depending on which poll you study or look at, California's public schools rank anywhere from 44th to 48th in the country. But according to the watchdog group Open the Books, Jennifer Siebel Newsom, the wife of California's governor, has raked in anywhere from $1 to $2 million by charging California's public schools up to $599 each to stream her movies. She calls them documentaries, but the definition of a documentary is a film that provides a factual record. And as many critics point out, Siebel Newsom's films, like The Mask You Live In, is really just a detail-by-detail account of why men pose such a big societal problem. And then in turn, the goal is to place the blame on 3rd and 4th grade boys and expect them to remedy said problem. It's unclear if Siebel Newsom's films have fixed society's issues, but they certainly appear to have broken school policies, because the movies reportedly contain images of nude women in compromising positions, along with a litany of profanities. One Sacramento area school superintendent said the films should not have been shown at his classrooms because they are inappropriate for elementary and middle schoolers. And it's notable that Siebel Newsom does not disclose which groups and organizations buy and license her films, which could pose ethical issues if, for example, her husband was to seek higher office, if there is such a thing. Tucker.
If there is such a thing. Great Trace Gallagher. You can watch Trace every night at midnight on Fox News, and we suggest you do. So never in the history of jobs has anybody had a more misleading job title than Alejandro Mayorkas. He is the Homeland Security Secretary. He has done nothing to enhance, but instead a lot to destroy our homeland security. He's left the border open, and he lied about it. Millions and millions and millions of foreign nationals whose identities we can't confirm have shown up, helped by the drug cartels, and come into our country to stay forever and live at public expense. That's all real. Andy Biggs knows it's real. He represents the state of Arizona in the Congress, and he's very frustrated by this. He joins us now. Congressman, thanks so much for coming on. So you've watched it. It's affected your state and your district, badly hurt both. How do you think the Congress should respond?
Well, Tucker, thanks for having me. And I think that the appropriate response is to do what the founders said. You remove somebody from office, a public official from office, who's causing public harm and violating the public trust, and that is impeachment. And I think that is the, quite frankly, the most pressing remedy that we need to avail ourselves of with Alejandro Mayorkas. What he has done is absolutely, in my opinion, it's unconscionable. He's literally attacked the essence of this country by attacking the geographical integrity, and he's changing so much. He's put so many people in danger. We've got terrorists here that would never have been here. We've got criminal gang members, and we've got well over 1 million people here. We have no idea anything about their background, where they went, because they just got away into the country because of his policies.
I mean, if you can't impeach a Homeland Security Secretary for destroying the Homeland Security and allowing an invasion, no exaggeration, an invasion to occur on his watch, then what can you impeach someone for?
Well, I think that's exactly right. And so I've had people say, but Andy, he didn't commit a real felony. And I said, but high crimes means that you're a public official and that you have violated the public trust and you need to be removed. Look at just the damage he's done. He came in and he basically got rid of every policy that was working. We had the Yuma sector, Tucker. In the last year of Trump, those policies had reduced the encounters to fewer than 9,000 for the entire fiscal year. Last year, that sector alone had over 360,000 encounters. And then you stretch that along the entire southern border and you're pushing 3 million encounters and another 1 million people who got in and got away. And those are the people that are bringing drugs, they're human trafficking, sex trafficking. They've put this country at risk. And quite frankly, the first thing that goes when a country is actually devolving is when you lose your geographical integrity. And Secretary Mayorkas, that's his main job, and he has willfully imposed his own dangerous policies on us. It's not negligence, it's not incompetence, it's willful.
Yeah, and it's a felony. He's ignoring the law that Congress passed. He's not elected. He's a bureaucrat. Right. Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona, great to see you tonight. Thank you. You're living in a non-democracy when it's dangerous to displease the ne'er-do-well children of the supreme leader. If you were, for example, at a red light in pre-invasion Baghdad and Uday Hussein came screaming up behind you drunk in his Lamborghini, you got the hell out of the way and you did not complain about it. And you didn't complain about it because Uday's dad ran the place and you did not want to make him mad. You might wind up like the members of his personal soccer team who dared to miss penalty kicks. That's what third world countries are like. All citizens are not equal in countries like that. Power derives from proximity to power. And that means the second most powerful people in a country like that are the children of the president. And very often they don't have jobs and are addicted to something. That's the way it works in places like that. And for a long time, that system seemed very foreign to most Americans. They were used to living in a democracy. They could barely even imagine it. But then, during the last presidential campaign, Joe Biden's daughter abandoned her diary somehow in a house she was staying at in Florida after she got out of rehab. And in that diary, Ashley Biden recounted how her father had taken showers with her when she was young, and she attributed her later sexual compulsions to that experience with her father. So by any standard, that seemed like clear evidence of abuse. And yet no law enforcement agency, so far as we know, ever asked Joe Biden about it. Instead, once Joe Biden became president, his FBI raided the home of journalist James O'Keefe and seized the evidence. Ashley Biden's diary was taken by force and has never been seen again. So the message was unmistakable. When Uday Hussein blows by in his Lamborghini, get the hell out of the way, peasant. Princelings have power, you do not. By the way, Hunter Biden's whole life has been a monument to that message. Despite a decades-long drug problem and no record of legitimate achievement of any kind, Hunter Biden has managed to accumulate the highest possible academic credentials. Georgetown and Yale Law. Don't try that at home. as well as what appears to be millions and millions and millions of dollars. How did he do that? You couldn't do it, but then you're not Joe Biden's son, and that's how he did it. He cut business deals with corrupt countries that his father was conducting diplomacy in as vice president of the United States. And then we know from evidence that he apparently planned to kick back some of that money to his father as part of the deal, 10% for the big guy. Now, that's completely illegal. And yet neither Hunter Biden nor his father, Joe Biden, have ever been indicted for doing that. Instead, and here's the best part, the real criminals, we learned yesterday, are the people who dared to talk about it. Yesterday, Hunter Biden's legal team released a letter demanding that Joe Biden's friends imprison anyone who criticizes Joe Biden's son. So these letters call on the Department of Justice, which Joe Biden controls, and Delaware Attorney General Kathy Jennings from Joe Biden's state to file criminal charges against Republicans who dared to possess and share the contents of his son's now famous laptop. And that list would include, among others, John Paul McIsaac, the owner of the Mac repair shop where Hunter Biden abandoned said laptop. According to Hunter Biden's high-paid lawyers, John Paul McIsaac should be in prison for doing this. Quote, Mr. McIsaac chose to work with Donald Trump's personal lawyer to weaponize Mr. Biden's personal computer data against his father, Joseph R. Biden. In other words, John Paul McIsaac didn't want Joe Biden to become president, and apparently that's now a federal crime. But wait a second, back up a second. Does that mean we can now say with certainty that the laptop is real? If we can say that, that means that Adam Schiff, who's now running for Senate in California, had better issue a statement pronto correcting his previous categorical claims about the laptop. Here was Adam Schiff in October of 2020 when he chaired the House Intelligence Committee.
Does it surprise you at all that this information Rudy Giuliani is peddling very well could be connected to some sort of Russian government disinformation campaign?
Well, we know that this whole smear on Joe Biden comes from the Kremlin. That's been clear for well over a year now that they've been pushing this false narrative about the vice president and his son.
We know this comes from the Kremlin, Adam Schiff said. And of course, Adam Schiff would know since he, unlike you, had access to top secret information. You weren't allowed to see it. He did see it. And on the basis of that knowledge told you it was from the Kremlin. And it's exactly what dozens of former intel officials told you. They saw the evidence, and this was from Russia. So now it looks like they were all lying. According to Hunter Biden's lawyers, quote, Mr. McIsaac unlawfully shared Mr. Biden's property with third parties. His property, he owned it. It was his. Yes, the laptop, according to Hunter Biden's lawyers, belonged to Hunter Biden. It did not come from the Kremlin. That's settled. Except, wait, no, it's not settled. Because today we got yet another statement from Hunter Biden's lawyers, and they seem to revise the first statement. Here's today's statement, and we're quoting. These letters do not confirm McIsaac's or others' versions of a so-called laptop. They address their conduct of seeking, manipulating, and disseminating what they allege to be Mr. Biden's personal data wherever they claim to have gotten it. So in other words, we believe the government should send these people to jail for possessing stolen property that belonged to Hunter Biden, but that so-called property may not actually exist and may not even belong to Hunter Biden. That's their argument. It's a novel legal theory, actually. In fact, it's so novel, it's totally incoherent. It's like prosecuting somebody for stealing your imaginary car. But even if we can agree that the laptop is real and not a deep fake produced by some diabolical Russian AI program, and again, neither Hunter Biden nor his lawyers have conceded that yet, maybe they will tomorrow. But even if we could all agree on that, there is another more fundamental problem. And it's this. Hunter Biden signed an agreement acknowledging that if he left his device at John Paul McIsaac's repair shop in Delaware for more than 90 days, if he didn't pick it up, he would forfeit ownership of it. He wrote that. No one disputes that he did. And then Hunter Biden violated the contract that he signed. And he violated it because he was a crackhead who was having an affair with his sister-in-law, at least 3 of his employees, and countless strippers and hookers, while at the same time trying to execute on illicit business deals with the Chinese. So he just didn't have time to return for his laptops. That makes sense. He was very busy. John Paul McIsaac, meanwhile, being the small business owner, called Hunter Biden again and again and tried to give the laptop back. But Hunter Biden was so busy, he ignored John Paul McIsaac. Watch.
He sort of disappears on you. So he disappears and never comes for that external hard drive that now maintains the data?
So now I'm in possession of his laptop, a backup of his laptop's home folder on an external drive that he provided, and no sign of Hunter. I think I called him again the following weekend or right before the end of the month. I always call customers at the end of the month to collect on out of delinquent bills. And then I think I called him a couple more times over the next month after that. So just no response.
Kept calling him. He was smoking too much crack with too many hookers. He didn't call me back. That was John Paul McIsaac's explanation. So it's kind of hard to blame John Paul McIsaac for this. He tried his best to return the laptop. And yet they are blaming him. In fact, Hunter Biden is demanding the Delaware Attorney General, Kathy Jennings, put that guy, John Paul McIsaac, in jail for what he did. On what grounds? Hunter Biden is the president's son. If he smokes too much crack to follow the terms of the contract he signed, that's not his problem. It's yours. Now, in a normal country, a normal prosecutor would laugh at an argument like that. But Hunter Biden is betting that Delaware Attorney General Kathy Jennings will take that argument very seriously, and he has reason to believe that she will. Because Kathy Jennings is not just the Attorney General, she is a longtime party hack ideologue who can be counted on to faithfully do the bidding of Democratic leaders and donors. And even better than that, Kathy Jennings is a longtime friend of the Biden family. In fact, she once worked for Hunter Biden's brother, Beau Biden, and she worships his father, Joe. We're not guessing. Here's a Facebook post from the now Attorney General of Delaware, Kathy Jennings, dated April 25th, 2019. We're quoting, "I've known Joe, Jill, and the Biden family for most of my life. Joe is one of the kindest and most genuine people I've ever known. Democrats are blessed with many excellent candidates this year, and I am proud of those choices and what they say about our party. I'm choosing Joe because nobody understands more what it means to heal, and right now, that's what America needs." Well, right now, the Biden family needs something very different, and Kathy Jennings may be willing to provide it. Again, this is the person that Hunter Biden's lawyers are calling on to send John Paul McIsaac to jail, and she very well may send him there. Doesn't seem like a fair fight, really. So here you have John Paul McIsaac, a small business owner who lives in a small, corrupt state controlled by the Biden family. He's the peasant in this scenario. And then you have Hunter Biden is the princeling. So with no obvious means of support, Hunter Biden has been living in a $20,000 a month spread in Malibu and can someone tell us how, afford a team of the most expensive attorneys in the United States of America. How is he doing that? We don't know. We can say one of these guys has a strong advantage in this battle, and it's not the little guy. So we wondered what John Paul McIsaac thinks of this. He's the author of American Injustice. He joins us now with his lawyer, Brian Della Rocca. Thanks to you both very much for coming on. John Paul McIsaac, just to you first, in the obvious question. So here, you really are the little guy in this case. You're literally a small business owner, and you're being threatened by the family that runs the country. Are you intimidated by this? You must be a little bit.
I'm a little bit, but you got to remember, Tucker, I've been dealing with intimidation from all fronts for the last couple of years, so I've kind of gotten used to it. This isn't as bad as being accused of being a traitor and working with Russia to affect an election, but it's pretty close.
So I would assume, as a small business owner, when someone drops a device off for you to repair, you want them to pick it up so you can get paid. I mean, I assume you didn't want to take possession of these devices, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm in the business to recover data or repair and fix these products, and I want to get paid for these jobs, and I didn't.
Yeah, but that's your fault now?
Apparently it is.
I want to ask your attorney a question as an attorney. And so Hunter Biden has hired, among many others, a man called Abbe Lowell, who's a longtime Democratic lawyer, well-regarded among lawyers, extremely expensive, probably one of the most expensive attorneys in the United States. Do you have any idea how Hunter Biden, who doesn't have a job that we know of, who's all kinds of claims against him, baby mama, among others. How is he affording Abby Lowell?
Well, that's the question that I have as well. Way beyond that, how many attorneys does he need? He's got Abby Lowell. He's got attorneys representing him in quite a few of his criminal matters. How many does he need? And the fact that Abby Lowell actually went along with this letter, which really produced a lot of lies about John Paul, saying that John Paul accessed the information without Hunter's consent, when we have shown Hunter's consent. Everyone knows Hunter consented. The fact that this attorney would participate in this is, I just don't understand it.
Well, I mean, clearly this is not about Hunter Biden. Obviously, I'm guessing here I have no knowledge that I'm not disclosing. But if a lifelong crackhead who's fighting, a million different battles on a million different fronts and doesn't appear to have a job can afford Abby Lowell and a stable of other attorneys, this is clearly an effort by the Democratic establishment, by donors, to crush you guys for political reasons. Is that an unfair assumption?
Well, that's exactly, that was the first thing I thought of. I received no notification of these letters until someone from CBS contacted me yesterday. I was in the car and they asked for a comment, and I had no idea what they were talking about. When I read the letters, I was appalled. This is really someone with so much money, or acting like they have a lot of money, going after someone who is really the little guy. And he's doing it on purpose. He's trying to intimidate. And it's interesting to me that this happened when it did, because as you may know, we filed a lawsuit against numerous parties, CNN, Politico, but one of the parties is Hunter Biden. It was very difficult to find where he was. He was in D.C. for a couple weeks, and he was moving around. Well, we finally tracked him down, and we were able to serve him last week. And now, all of a sudden, we see this. When there was always talk of, Hunter's going on the offensive, he's going after Rudy, he's going after all the...
Right.
Never a mention of John Paul. And then all of a sudden, two of the letters, the primary, most of the paragraphs, most of the description in the letters are John Paul.
Right. Well, right. Always pick the poorest guy to destroy. Uday and Kusei drive into you drunk, and you're the one who gets punished for it. Godspeed to you both. I appreciate it. John Paul McIsaac and Brian De La Rocca. Thank you, both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we haven't watched a ton of cable news recently, but we assumed with mass layoffs underway across the U.S. economy, an egg shortage, crumbling cities, the prospect of a third world war looming on the near horizon, we assumed we knew what the other channels would be covering, because there are an awful lot of threats out there. What we didn't know until we tuned into MSNBC and CNN the other day was that all of those threats go by a single name. And that name is Mr. George Santos. George Santos. Weeks into his new job as a freshman member of Congress, and just months from his previous life of near total anonymity, George Santos has somehow transformed into the single most dangerous and historically significant figure on the global stage today. George Santos is like 9/11 in human form. Nothing will ever be the same now that George Santos is here. You will never forget the moment you first saw George Santos. Where were you when George Santos was elected? It's a story you will tell your grandchildren. Watch.
On Capitol Hill, this is George Santos's reality. It seems almost every day there are new questions about the freshman congressman's past, some stretching back more than a decade.
Can you keep up with all the Santos lies and controversies? He is now out-trumping Trump in terms of flooding the zone with excrement.
Not just saying that he played volleyball, but he had a scholarship, that he slayed teams from Harvard and Yale.
A perfect portrayal of self-loathing, that he clearly is so disgusted with himself and so disgusted with the life that he's led, a life of lies, a life of fables.
People didn't decide because they thought he was somebody totally
totally different. It was a lie and a fraudulent election. He has to resign.
Not a volleyball champion, and he doesn't appear to be a champion of the people either. The voters did not elect you, Mr. Santos. They elected a version of you invented by your imagination. Sadly, George Santos represents so much that is wrong today. Lies, denial, and the death of shame.
It was a stolen election. It was a stolen election. You heard Adam Kinzinger say it. And CNN filled in the blanks. It's not just that George Santos claimed that he once played volleyball in college. Played volleyball in college. It's worse than that. Indescribably worse. George Santos told other people out loud, and CNN can exclusively confirm this, that he had a volleyball scholarship, perhaps the most coveted credential in collegiate sports. But he didn't. It was all a facade. It was a tissue of lies constructed to deceive the American people. There was no volleyball scholarship. There was not a single dollar of volleyball scholarship. George Santos made it all up out of whole cloth, out of thin air. George Santos is an ersatz volleyball player, a fraud, a ghoul. People voted for this man believing he had played collegiate volleyball on a scholarship, and he hadn't. And yet tonight, ladies and gentlemen, this thief of volleyball glory strides the halls of the United States Congress unimpeded by law enforcement. It's like another insurrection. And by the way, we are hearing tonight, we can't confirm this, but we're continuing our investigation into George Santos. There are reports tonight that he did not actually work at Citibank. He did not work at Citibank. No volleyball scholarship, never worked at Citibank. What percentage of the people who voted for George Santos under false pretenses would have done so had they known he never played volleyball and never worked at Citibank? We can only guess, obviously a very small percentage. So ignore the Chinese spy balloon, ladies and gentlemen. George Santos. There is, by the way, a Chinese spy balloon flying over the United States. The Pentagon does not want to shoot it down. Why would you want to shoot a Chinese spy balloon down? That seems mean and racist. Why aren't they shooting it down? George Santos! George Santos! We'll have more on it next. This is a Fox News alert and a very strange story. The Pentagon, as you may have heard, is now tracking a very high-altitude Chinese spy balloon over the northern United States. Apparently it's over Montana right now. You're seeing photographs of that balloon on your screen. The Pentagon has decided for some reason not to shoot down the balloon, even though they say it's flying over some, quote, sensitive sites. So there are intercontinental ballistic missile silos in that area. What is this? Joining us now is Jamil Jaffer from the National Security Institute. Jamil, thanks so much for coming on. This, presidents make a lot of complicated decisions. This doesn't seem complicated. There's a Chinese spy balloon. Why not shoot it down? What do you think is happening here?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tucker. You know, what's really interesting about this incident is that the Defense Department has made clear that this isn't the first time that we've seen Chinese spy balloons over U.S. territory in the past. What's interesting about this particular incident is the fact that we've called it out, we've made it public, and that they actually froze the airspace over Billings, Montana, and put planes up thinking about taking the shot. Now, why they didn't take the shot, why they didn't take it down, hard to know, Tucker. But it's worth noting, back in 2001, the Chinese forced down an American spy plane on Hainan Island, kidnapped U.S. airmen and airwomen for a number of days, and stole a bunch of surveillance assets off that plane. Now, that was almost 2 decades ago.
So you almost answered my question. Do you think if the American Pentagon floated a spy balloon over Chinese missile bases, that Chairman Xi would say, I'm not really sure how to respond. Maybe we should just let it keep floating?
Yeah, look, I think that's highly unlikely. I mean, you saw Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan just a few months back, and Kevin McCarthy is going to Taiwan shortly, and the Chinese were threatening to shoot down Nancy Pelosi's plane. So, it's clear that the Chinese would take action. It's surprising that we're not.
You want to be as fair as you can in situations like this because there's so much we don't know, and you're tempted to leap to the conclusion these people are completely impotent. But could there be a good reason for not shooting it down?
Well, you know, you could say that they wanted to see where it's going to go, what it's trying to track. Is it looking at our ICBMs? Is it looking at something else? They may be collecting information off of it, too. So there's a possibility there are good reasons for not shooting it down. But it is odd that you would announce it, make it clear that you've seen it, and then not take action.
Well, that's exactly right. It's such a smart observation. I appreciate it. Jamil Jaffer, thank you so much.
Thanks, Tucker.
So a woman called Ilhan Omar has been on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Omar came to this country from Somalia, and then she proceeded to make it very clear she doesn't like the country she settled in. According to DNA evidence, she also married her brother in order to commit immigration fraud, something that obviously happened for which she's never been punished. So today, for a bunch of reasons unrelated to that, the House voted to expel Ilhan Omar from the Foreign Affairs Committee. And in response, the theater kids in the squad completely lost emotional control. For real. Watch this.
This is about targeting women of color in the United States of America. Don't tell me, because I didn't get a single apology.
Time has expired.
When my life was threatened. Thank you.
Let me make gentlewoman's time is expired.
Ilhan Omar is right where she belongs.
The gentlewoman's time is expired.
Is needed on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Her clarity, conviction,
the gentlewoman's time is expired and she is no longer recognized.
The GOP is now doing what it is best at. Weaponizing hate against a black, beautiful Muslim woman.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Omar will not be silenced.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Congressman Omar,
the gentlewoman's time has expired.
That our country is failing you today through this chamber. You belong.
The gentlewoman is no longer recognized.
Wow. These people are really troubled. It really is the party of weak men and angry women. What to make of this? Adam Carolla is an expert on this kind of behavior due to his many years in television and comedy. He's host of the Adam Carolla Show. He joins us now. I mean, you have worked in the entertainment business, you know, for many decades. You've seen emotionally incontinent people. How would you compare them to what you just saw here?
It would take many of them to make one AOC.
What? By the way, how is she a person of color? She's whiter than I am. It's like insane.
Well, okay, so that's a good subject, which is, I've said for a long time, it's never been a better time to be an actual racist because you could just hide amongst everyone who's being accused of being a racist, which is everyone in America who's not a person of color. They're hysterics. They're also setting the movement back. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah.
Like, they seem incompetent. They seem insane. They seem hysterical. Like,
But I thought you weren't supposed to. So, and I actually like and respect women, just saying. And you were not supposed to call women hysterical because that's a stereotype. But then Rashida Tlaib gets up and behaves in a way that can only be described as hysterical. She's literally in a state of hysteria.
If this was a co-pilot on your commercial flight, you would get off of the plane, right? You would go, I don't want this nut job anywhere near a yoke. That's... So obviously, but it's kind of our fault. Like, if you really think about it, like, you know, COVID was our fault. Yes, we have horrible leaders, horrible politicians, Fauci, CDC, Rochelle Walensky. We listened to them. We yelled at our own citizens to put a mask up. We didn't have to do it. We could have done it if we stood up. And it's the same way with racism. They bang the racism drum at every moment of the day, and we buy into it. We back off. We don't want to talk about the race hustlers that are out there that are constantly doing this. It's our fault. We're letting this very small minority do this to us because everyone is so scared of being called a COVID denier, a vax denier, a racist denier. Like, we're so freaked out that we let these nut jobs take control and then run amok.
She married her own brother. Okay, so that would seem like the headline. I don't understand how you could write a news story about Ilhan Omar, whatever you think of her views, and not say Ilhan Omar, comma, who married her own brother, comma.
But if you did that, you'd be called a racist.
Well, I think every culture is against marrying your own brother. I don't think that's like an Anglo thing.
No, it's you are critiquing a woman of color, and thus you are a racist.
Oh, universal standards are racist.
Yes,
I totally
yes,
forgot about
it's a default setting.
Can I just ask one question? So if you're Rashida Tlaib, do you go home, and of course she's looking at the tape of herself because she obsessively Googles herself. People like that always do, narcissists always do. And do you see your own performance where you literally start crying over a committee assignment and say, you know, I'm a brave, bold, competent woman?
I can't imagine that. I mean, I imagine when she goes home, she first has to feed her 19 cats, and then she can hop on the computer and watch this horrible, pathetic performance. In a victim culture world, she gets an Oscar for that. So that, we're coming from a different generation where you would yell at someone, get a hold of yourself, woman. Have a shot of brandy. Pull it together. You're a leader. You're making a fool of yourself. But now we're in a victim culture reward center now, and we're handing it out. So she gets an Emmy for that.
Last quick question. The 19 cats, they judge that, don't they, secretly, that kind of behavior?
Tabbies do.
They do, right?
Yes.
People think their cats don't judge them. They're lying to themselves.
They see right through your soul.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Adam Carolla, great to see you tonight. Thank you.